Okay, so some huge news just dropped. The U.S. Supreme Court has made a landmark decision, striking down President Trump's global tariffs. In this explainer, we're not just going to break down what this all means for the economy and global trade, we're also going to give you the key English vocabulary you need to understand every single part of this story.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the landmark ruling itself. Then, we'll dive into the power struggle at the heart of this, the president versus Congress. After that, we'll get into the specific language of tariffs, some really useful words here. And finally, we'll look at the fallout. What happens now?
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, the landmark ruling. What exactly went down today? Wow, this quote from a news report really just cuts straight to the chase, doesn't it? I mean, in the super complex world of politics and law, you almost never see something this blunt. A major policy, a key weapon for the administration, has just been defeated.
So here's the most important takeaway. The highest court in the United States has decided that the president's really broad global tariffs are unconstitutional. They've been struck down. And that phrase just means they've been legally invalidated, canceled. And these weren't just any old tariffs. They were put in place using a federal law that was really meant for national emergencies, which makes this whole decision even more of a big deal.
And to really get the impact, let's do a quick rewind on the timeline. It all kicked off back in April with this big announcement the president called Liberation Day. From that point on, tariffs were imposed on countries all over the world. They started around 10%, but in some cases, they got ratcheted up to over 100%. And all of that has led to today, February 20th, where the Supreme Court has basically said, time out, this has to stop.
And that leads us perfectly into our next section. Because, this ruling, it wasn't really about economics. Nope. At its heart, this was a battle over power, a classic conflict over the separation of powers that's been baked into the U.S. system since day one. Which, of course, brings us to the key question. Why? Why did the court actually make this decision? What was the fundamental legal problem with what the president was doing?
And this slide just lays it out so clearly. On the left, you've got the president's action. He unilaterally imposed these tariffs. Unilaterally, that's a key word here. It just means he did it all by himself. From the White House, no approval needed. But on the right, you have the U.S. Constitution, which is crystal clear that the power to create taxes, and let's be real, a tariff is a tax, belongs to Congress.
So the court's thinking really boiled down to a few main points. First, the president bypassed Congress. To bypass someone is to just go around them, ignore the proper channels. He didn't follow the rules. He also misused a law, the Emergency Powers Act, for something it was never designed for. I mean, get this, that law doesn't even use the word tariff. And finally, and this is important, the court's decision doesn't ban tariffs altogether. It just says the president can't be the one to do it alone.
Okay, for our third section, let's focus on the language itself. Because to really, truly understand this news story and to be able to talk about it confidently, you got to know the key vocabulary. So let's walk through it together. First up, the star of our show, a tariff. It's pretty simple, really. It's just a tax on stuff coming into or going out of a country. The whole idea is to make imported products more expensive, hoping that you'll buy stuff made at home instead.
Next, a ruling. This is the official, final decision from a court. When the Supreme Court issues a ruling, that's it. It's the law of the land. There's no higher appeal. It is an authoritative, final word kind of decision.
Now, this is such a great word, leverage. In this whole situation, the tariffs weren't just a tax. They were a tool. They were designed to be leverage, a source of power to influence other countries, to pressure them into making trade deals that were better for the U.S.
And finally, let's look at how the news actually talks about applying tariffs. You're going to hear these 5 verbs all the time. Enact is the formal, legal one. Impose is probably the most common and has this feeling of force. Implement is just about putting a plan into action. Ratchet up is perfect for describing how they increase tariffs little by little. And my favorite is slap on, which is super informal and makes it sound like the tariff was just added suddenly and forcefully.
All right, on to our final section. Let's look to the future. Now that we understand what happened and why it happened, the billion-dollar question is, what are the consequences? What's the economic and political fallout going to be?
Let's start with this absolutely massive number, $280 billion. That is the amount of money these tariffs were bringing into the U.S. government every year. With this new ruling, that revenue, poof, it's gone. And that leaves a huge hole in the federal budget that someone is going to have to figure out how to fill.
And, this brings us to one of the most misunderstood parts of this entire debate. When you hear about tariffs on goods from, say, China or Germany, who do you think is actually paying that bill? And here's the crucial point, laid out perfectly by economist Justin Wolfers. Foreign countries don't write a check to the U.S. Treasury. The tax is paid by the American companies that are importing the goods. And this also means we might be about to see a whole flood of lawsuits from these companies trying to get their money back for tariffs they paid that the court now says were unconstitutional.
So, is this the end of the line for the administration's trade strategy? Not a chance. It seems they've had a plan B waiting in the wings all along. They might try to relabel some of these trade issues as national security matters to use different laws. They could also just target specific industries. Or they could do what the court said they should have done from the very beginning, go through Congress. The fight is definitely not over.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really thought-provoking question. Remember that word leverage we talked about? Those tariffs were basically the big stick that was used to get more than 20 countries to sign new trade deals. So now that the stick is gone, how strong are those deals really? Will countries feel like they have to stick to the terms they agreed to when they were under all that pressure? That right there is the new, uncertain reality of global trade. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.
喜欢这种学习方式，欢迎订阅我的频道，让我们一起用下一个10分钟，把商业英文变简单。